What is a vector? A vector is one of the most important mathematical tools in all of physics. Let's take a look at one. The simplest way to see what a vector is basically an arrow, but it's an arrow with some really important properties. So there's two vectors. Now, what differentiates these two vectors? Well, there's only two properties really that define an arrow. One is the length of the arrow, how long it is, and the fancy word that they're going to use in physics is magnitude for length. Don't let that scare you. Magnitude is just the length of the vector. That's the word you're going to hear. And the other property is the direction. In other words, if we take a look at the big arrow, right, we could just make the big arrow the smaller one by shrinking it and rotating it, so by changing its length and direction. So that's really the only two properties of arrows. Okay, who cares about arrows? We do, because they can model all kinds of cool stuff. We're going to look at a particular vector that's really important called velocity, that you probably heard of in your class. And that's denoted a V with the arrow on top. The arrow is there to tell you that that thing is a vector. Okay, velocity is often confused with speed. Okay, and here's the difference. Velocity is two pieces of information. In fact, all vectors are two pieces of information. They're all a magnitude, aka length, and a direction. Okay, so the difference between speed and velocity is that the velocity is a speed with a direction, and the speed is just speed without a direction. So let me give you an example. An example of a speed would be 10 meters per second. An example of a velocity would be 10 meters per second north. Okay, so you'll notice that the velocity is two pieces of information. It's a magnitude, which in this case is the length of the vector is 10 meters a second, and the direction is north, whereas the speed is basically just the magnitude without the direction. Okay, one thing that can confuse a lot of students is, wait a second, 10 meters a second, that's a speed, not a length. How can we use a vector to represent speed? And the answer is you can just do a scale, right? Where, let's look at the squares on this page here. We can call one square 1 meter per second, right? And then an arrow of length, say 3 squares, well, that has a magnitude or a velocity of 3 meters per second. Make sense? So in that way, you can use the magnitude or length of the vector to represent all kinds of things that aren't necessarily length. So I hope that gives you a little insight into what a vector actually is.